Welcome to Reform Thinking, where we examine how principles of good governance and durable systems apply to the most urgent issues of our time. Today, we are taking a deep dive into a really unusual and frankly inspiring story of national recovery. Ukraine has faced destruction on a scale that is, just staggering: cities shattered, industries disrupted. Yet, amidst the ruins and under constant threat, the nation has identified its core source of economic resilience, and indeed its entire post-war reconstruction architecture, in something intangible: its digital sector.
That is the core finding of the material we analyze. It really is. When observers look at large-scale physical conflict, the natural impulse is to, count the steel and concrete that needs replacing: the factories, the roads, the housing stock. What our sources show us is that Ukraine has decided to use its robust information technology sector not just as an industry to be preserved, but as the actual structural backbone upon which the rest of the country will be redesigned.
The structural backbone, that's a powerful way to put it.
It is. So our mission in this deep dive is to unpack this comprehensive strategy. We'll analyze the legal frameworks, the digital state platforms, and the detailed technical plans designed to engineer for instability. We want you, the listener, to grasp how these seemingly disparate digital initiatives form a coherent, risk-mitigating structure for a modernized, transparent future state.
Okay, let's unpack this. To understand the magnitude of this strategy, we really have to first appreciate the surprising survival story of Ukrainian IT companies during the conflict itself. This didn't just happen by chance, did it? It was years in the making.
Absolutely not. We must establish the pre-war status of the IT sector because it explains why this industry was structurally unique and so resilient. Ukraine had already set itself up for structural digital success, and that stemmed from a very strong tradition in STEM education.
Right, and this tradition led to a deep pool of mathematically and technically trained graduates. This educational foundation was key, wasn't it? Combined with certain labor market dynamics which helped the country move away from being seen as just a cheap outsourcing location.
Exactly. They were moving toward becoming a hub for high-value research and development, and this talent didn't just stay in one place. Tech hubs emerged and matured really rapidly in cities like Kyiv, Lviv, Kharkiv, and Dnipro. These weren't isolated pockets of activity. There were interconnected ecosystems supporting both domestic startups and multinational corporations, serving clients mostly across Europe and North America.
So it sounds like they had already achieved a kind of critical mass before the invasion hit. And at the same time, the state started moving policy towards styling itself as a digital state. This was a conscious, strategic choice to redefine how government functions.
And a core part of that strategic choice was the Dia City legal regime. It was actually implemented just before the full-scale invasion. This was a deliberate effort to create a more flexible and modern legal environment specifically tailored for IT firms.
We hear that term Dia City a lot. What specific practical benefits did this regime offer to developers and companies that made it so attractive? For our audience, the mechanism is what matters.
That's vital because the appeal wasn't just some vague promise of regulatory stability. Dia City addressed the three major pain points for the tech sector. First, and maybe most importantly, was taxes. IT specialists and employees operating within Dia City benefit from an extremely competitive tax environment, notably a 5% personal income tax rate on their compensation. This replaced the standard rate, which dramatically boosted their net earnings and, incentivized top talent to stay in the country.
5%. That's highly competitive on a global scale. It must have seriously reduced the temptation for talent drain. What about the employment structure itself?
That's the second key area. Dia City introduced a new, flexible employment framework called a gig contract. It was a specialized contract for IT professionals. This structure blends elements of civil law contracts and traditional employment law, allowing companies to quickly scale teams up or down, to manage project-based work, and to offer share option agreements, all under clear, modern rules that align with international best practices.
So you have regulatory predictability, massive tax benefits, and flexible labor laws all in place before the crisis. This groundwork really set the stage for what we're talking about in this first section. Resilience.
Precisely. Now let's talk about the key attribute that defined the survival of this sector during the conflict. It's the inherent difference between a physical, tangible asset and an intangible, digital one.
It seems obvious when you say it, but it has profound policy consequences.
It absolutely does. The critical factor that strongly supported tech resilience is the intangible nature of software and digital services. Unlike a metal fabrication factory or a deep water port that can be physically targeted and destroyed, software production, cloud services, and digital platforms can be, in a sense, instantly relocated and reconfigured. All you really need is the skilled human capital and basic connectivity.
And that adaptability was put to the test immediately. The sources we looked at have numerous anecdotes that highlight this. It wasn't just a theory.
No, it was proven wartime performance. The reports confirm that Ukrainian IT companies maintained an astonishing level of business continuity. They continued to export software and services even under intense missile attacks and rolling blackouts. We heard stories, not just generalized actions, but specific accounts, like one large outsourced development firm in Kharkiv. They managed to relocate nearly 80% of their 1,500 employees to temporary hubs in Lviv and Poland within a week. And they maintained client delivery schedules with only minor delays.
That kind of rapid physical relocation is one thing, but maintaining productivity under consistent power outages is a whole other challenge. How did they manage that technical continuity?
They demonstrated really impressive improvisation and resourcefulness. Companies poured capital into redundancy. They established centralized digital bunkers, often generator-powered office blocks or co-working spaces equipped with enterprise-grade connectivity and satellite links, specifically Starlink, to bridge the power cuts. The work just continued wherever you could find laptops, sufficient power, and, sheer determination.
It's a knowledge-based engine that can keep running when physical infrastructure is immobilized. This inherent proven wartime capability is what makes the IT sector structurally different from traditional heavy industries like steel or agriculture.
And this capability is why the sources view IT as a comparatively safe bet for an economy facing the certainty of lingering security risks. Investing in the digital economy is investing in assets that are difficult to destroy and easy to move, which aligns perfectly with responsible long-term planning under perpetual duress. It provides a source of hard currency inflow that is just less exposed to kinetic risk than, say, agriculture or metallurgy.
Okay, so while the private sector was showing this remarkable resilience in its business operations, the state itself had a crucial lifeline. It was something they built for convenience that became absolutely critical for survival: the DIA platform.
The story of DIA is fascinating because it started as an efficiency project, but during the conflict, it became the indispensable infrastructure for state legitimacy and, well, for survival. DIA, which covers the core app and all the underlying infrastructure, was the flagship component of that pre-war digital state choice we talked about.
And its original purpose was just streamlining services, right?
Yeah.
Allowing citizens to access official documents, their passport, driver's license, register businesses, pay fees right from their phones, avoiding the physical queues.
That was the original design, yes. However, once the full-scale invasion began, the government's investment in this platform paid off exponentially. When physical government offices were closed, destroyed, or inaccessible due to occupation, DIA became an immediate and indispensable lifeline for citizens to maintain contact with the legitimate state.
And here's where it gets really interesting for me. They didn't just maintain the pre-war functions. The speed with which they engineered and deployed critical wartime features was extraordinary.
Absolutely. The platform had to respond instantly to humanitarian and administrative needs. It provided digital access to necessary documents and social assistance, which was crucial for people fleeing their homes or stranded. Critically, it allowed citizens to register instantly as internally displaced persons, or IDPs, which is vital for aid coordination and logistics tracking.
And the sources detail how this platform became the immediate starting block for post-war recovery efforts, even while the war was still raging.
Yes. A key feature they added was the ability for citizens to report destroyed or damaged property. They could provide geographic coordinates and photographic evidence directly through the app. This allowed the state to begin building a comprehensive damage inventory and, later, to enable citizens to claim compensation for damaged property under the e-recovery program. On top of that, the platform quickly facilitated the sale of defense bonds, turning what was a consumer finance tool into an instrument for security mobilization.
This successful deployment under extreme duress demonstrated something fundamental. It showed that digital tools can dramatically improve the speed, transparency, and reach of state action, especially when traditional infrastructure is failing. It provided a kind of tangible legitimacy to state action when the state apparatus might have been physically absent.
And this wartime success is what fuels the post-war vision. Dia is now viewed not as just an app, but as a living proof of concept. It's a foundational layer that is slated to become the operating system of public life.
That sounds ambitious, but I have to interject with a challenge here. DIA is inherently centralized. It collects vast amounts of citizen data, it tracks movement, it controls access to critical services. Given the history of institutional weakness and political instability in the region, how can the sources genuinely suggest that independent oversight is enough to prevent the misuse of this powerful, centralized data infrastructure? I mean, is the risk of surveillance or political pressure truly mitigated?
That is a crucial question, and it's one the architects of the system must address head-on, and the sources do recognize this risk. The answer lies not in decentralizing the data itself, but in decentralizing access and building accountability right into the code. The plan is to ensure DIA is built with open standards and well-documented application programming interfaces, or APIs.
So instead of being a monolithic closed system,
It becomes a common digital infrastructure. This is a key policy choice. It allows other actor startups, civil society organizations, foreign investors to innovate and build services or watchdog tools on top of the government systems without controlling the core data itself. This external scrutiny fosters transparency and creates an ecosystem of checks and balances. For example, by exposing specific, anonymized datasets or service interfaces, civil society can build independent tools to monitor IDPA distribution or track the speed of compensation payments. This external validation is planned as a critical layer of defense against internal abuse alongside the formal legal safeguards we'll discuss later on.
okay, that makes sense. Moving from that wartime improvisation to a deliberate long-term policy that requires clear direction. The sources identify three strategic objectives that now guide Ukraine's approach, ensuring that all these investments fit into a larger, coherent plan.
Right. These objectives function as a policy compass, making sure every dollar of reconstruction aid and every legislative effort is aligned with this vision of a modernized, stable state.
Objective 1. IT as an enabler of all other sectors. So this means treating IT not as a separate self-contained industry aiming for its own growth, but explicitly as a sophisticated tool designed to support and multiply the impacts of agriculture, construction, healthcare, everything.
This is a sophisticated policy shift. It moves IT from being just a high-value export commodity to becoming a utility, a means to an end. In practical terms, this means designing digital solutions for the most urgent reconstruction tasks right away. So for reconstruction management, they plan to use IT to map damaged infrastructure in real time, manage complex building projects through centralized platforms, and monitor supply chains to ensure materials actually reach their destination.
And crucially, this objective is fundamentally tied to fighting corruption and ensuring accountability for that massive influx of international funds.
Absolutely. The use of digital solutions for fund transparency is mandatory. The plan involves tracking the flow of funds with real-time, publicly visible data, often using distributed ledger technologies or specific audit trails. This level of transparency isn't just a political talking point. It's a technical requirement being enforced by international donors. And beyond infrastructure, IT is crucial for sectoral support, deploying telemedicine platforms to reach war-affected regions and supporting agriculture via precision farming to boost yields.
Okay. Objective 2 focuses on aligning with European Union standards. This isn't just a diplomatic aspiration. It's a hard-nosed, strategic economic decision driven by the goal of EU membership.
Yes, this convergence is non-negotiable for the post-war strategy. The country has to align its legal and technical framework with the entire EU body of law, known as the acquis communautaire, specifically the parts covering data protection, cybersecurity, and digital markets.
When we talk about the acquis, what specific parts of the digital framework are most critical for Ukraine to adopt? It's a vast legal environment.
The sources identify three areas needing immediate synchronized adoption. First is data protection, which means strict adherence to GDPR principles. This is vital because if Ukrainian companies are handling EU citizens' data, they have to provide equivalent protection. Second is market regulation, so alignment with the Digital Services Act and the Digital Markets Act, which regulate large online platforms. And third, and maybe most urgent due to the ongoing threat, is cybersecurity alignment, specifically adopting the requirements of the NIS2 directive, which sets a very high bar for security.
And the private sector itself views this alignment as highly valuable, correct?
Oh, it's described as a passport to the EU's digital single market. For foreign investors, this convergence reduces risk because Ukraine starts to look less like a risky outlier and more like an extension of the familiar European legal environment. For Ukrainian tech companies, it immediately expands their accessible market and lowers the barrier for handling regulated European data.
Finally, Objective 3, integrating dual-use innovation. This is about managing all the digital innovations driven by defense needs, drones, targeting software, cyber defense tools, and strategically moving them into the civilian economy.
This presents a significant challenge. The strategic aim is to prevent these highly specialized technologies from just becoming isolated military tools or, drifting into an unregulated gray zone. The goal is to build a regulated dual-use ecosystem where these technologies, like advanced AI for image processing, are developed under clear regulatory rules that promote commercialization.
That seems like it would require some very complex frameworks. If the state helped develop or finance some of this technology, who owns the intellectual property? And how do you ensure it isn't sold to adversarial actors?
That is the core policy choice they have to make. This requires establishing transparent export controls that classify specific technologies based on their potential military application. It also requires clear ownership and licensing arrangements for tech developed with state support, making sure private companies can commercialize them while the state retains necessary use rights.
So it's about applying stringent ethical and economic guidelines to adapt these wartime tools for responsible, high-value peacetime use.
Precisely. If they structure this correctly, it can position Ukraine not just as a consumer of high-tech, but as a respected partner in global security innovation, bringing high-quality, battle-tested technology into European and global markets in a regulated way.
This next section gets to the core philosophical principle guiding the entire reconstruction: engineering for instability. The wartime experience exposed how vulnerable centralized systems are, especially that centralized Soviet-era power grid. So the guiding principle for recovery is to build back different, prioritizing durability over pure efficiency.
That is the strategic shift. They're moving away from systems that rely on the assumption of peace to systems designed for maximum resilience under continuous, high-intensity stress. This requires institutionalizing decentralization, redundancy, and flexibility right into the infrastructure's architecture.
Let's start with digital infrastructure resilience. What does that practically entail in terms of network design for a government that has seen its offices and servers literally bombed?
It involves a massive coordinated effort across several technical layers. First, they're adopting a compulsory cloud-first strategy for government and critical private services. Key systems have to be hosted in redundant cloud environments. This is a deliberate legal and financial commitment to move data off vulnerable physical servers located inside Ukraine.
I assume this means leveraging foreign, multinational cloud providers. How do they handle the legal and sovereignty issues when you're hosting sensitive government data abroad?
That's the technical and legal challenge. It requires secure, mirrored hosting with trusted partners abroad, often in allied EU countries. Data mirroring means creating exact copies of data in real time across secure, geographically separate locations. To address data sovereignty, they put specific legal agreements and technical controls in place, ensuring that foreign governments can't unilaterally access the data and that encryption keys remain solely under Ukrainian control. The sources indicate strong partnerships with companies like AWS, Google Cloud, and Oracle are central to this strategy.
The physical networks themselves, the fiber optic cables that carry the data, those must be hardened as well.
Absolutely. The design has to reflect the lessons of war. Fiber optic networks must be laid out with multiple routes and automatic failover options. If a section of cable or a central switching node is destroyed, the network must instantly reroute traffic along a different path without any service interruption. It creates a mesh network rather than a hierarchical one, and distributed data storage is essential to prevent progress from being wiped out by a single concentrated strike.
But the most sophisticated digital architecture is useless without electricity. So the strategy must also address decentralizing energy for IT.
This is perhaps the single most critical infrastructure lesson they learned. Reliance on large, centralized power plants and long transmission lines proved highly vulnerable to missile strikes. The new strategy for IT infrastructure emphasizes diversification and decentralization of power generation, promoting regional and local sources.
This brings us to microgrids. Our sources define them as vital components of resilience. How do they actually function in this context?
A microgrid is essentially a small, semi-autonomous network that can disconnect, or island itself, from the main power grid in an emergency. They rely on local generation sources like diesel generators, solar arrays, or small gas turbines, combined with substantial battery storage. When the main grid goes down due to an attack, The microgrid just isolates itself and continues to power its specific local area.
And the strategy is to strategically co-locate the IT hubs with these protected power
Oh,
sources.
precisely. IT hubs, data centers, and critical switching centers should be protected by co-locating them with reliable local generation and storage infrastructure. They'll use these microgrids to reduce dependency on those vulnerable long-distance power lines. This policy turns the IT hubs themselves into resilient islands of digital functionality, ensuring the government, the military, and the economy can keep functioning even during massive system-wide grid failures.
That sounds incredibly expensive but necessary. It's the very definition of paying a premium for stability.
Indeed. It costs significantly more upfront than relying on centralized supply, but it ensures that the digital engine of the economy doesn't collapse because of a single failure point, a cost they've already measured in massive economic disruption.
And finally, the essential protective layer that ties all of this infrastructure together is mandatory systemic cybersecurity.
Yes, security cannot be bolted on at the end. It has to be embedded into every layer of the network and architecture. Post-war infrastructure requires robust measures mandated by law. This means strengthening national incident response teams and implementing mandatory security standards for all critical infrastructure providers: energy, telecoms, finance. And this alignment directly relates back to Objective 2, adopting the standards of the EU's NIS2 directive, which raises the bar for security reporting and response across the board. For the recovery to be durable and, politically sustainable, the architects of this plan have to proactively address foreseeable, often internally generated challenges. The planning documents identify 4 major risks that, if they're ignored, could undermine the entire digital strategy, regardless of how much foreign money is invested.
Let's start with risk 1, social and regional inequality, also known as the digital divide. This speaks directly to issues of equity and the reconstruction.
The threat here is fundamentally political and social resentment. A dynamic IT sector generates high-paying jobs, often 4 to 5 times the national average, but these opportunities tend to concentrate in a few well-connected Western cities and among a narrow band of professionals. This risks leaving rural or severely war-devastated regions behind, creating a visible gap between the digital elites and the rest of the population. This inequality is politically dangerous because it can breed deep resentment.
So the mitigation strategy has to be one of proactive inclusion, ensuring the benefits are distributed geographically.
Yes, this requires deliberate, conscious policy choices to counter the natural tendency of talent to cluster. For example, mandating the location of new government data centers and high-speed tech parks in or near war-affected regions, or in smaller secondary cities that previously lacked high-speed connectivity. Furthermore, there has to be dedicated funding for scholarships and intensive reskilling programs specifically targeted at individuals from frontline communities, ensuring they have access to the entry points of this high-paying digital economy. Rural connectivity has to be prioritized.
Okay. Risk 2 addresses governance and privacy abuse. The paradox of the centralized, powerful digital state tool that is DIA.
The threat is very real. Centralized digital state tools could be corrupted or misused for surveillance, or to exert political pressure on opposition figures or journalists, especially if checks and balances remain weak. Given the history of post-Soviet institutional fragility, this concern is constantly raised by civil society and international partners.
The mitigation strategy, then, requires rigorous technical design combined with robust legal safeguards.
Exactly. Technical safeguards mean mandatory adherence to privacy by design principles. The systems must collect only the absolute minimum data necessary for the service and must employ encryption and anonymization wherever possible. Crucially, all access to sensitive personal data has to be rigorously logged and audited, making any internal misuse traceable back to the individual official or system that accessed it.
And the legal complement to that.
This has to be complemented by empowering independent oversight bodies, like a strengthened data protection commissioner, to investigate misuse without political interference. These bodies must have real teeth, with serious penalties, including jail time, for officials or companies who abuse their access to citizen data. Trust in this system is built on proven accountability and enforcement, not just on promises.
Risk 3 relates to external relations, dependence on foreign funding and agendas. This is an existential risk given the scale of the financial needs.
The threat is that heavy reliance on external funding might turn Ukraine's digital strategy into a collage of donor projects, a fragmented, inconsistent patchwork of ideas driven by the specific short-term cycles and reporting requirements of individual grant givers, rather than a coherent long-term national master plan. This lack of strategic coordination risks wasting resources and creating incompatible systems.
So how does the mitigation strategy address that dependence without just rejecting the necessary aid?
It requires cultivating a strong domestic policy vision that is consistently articulated. Ukraine has to develop a clear, publicly debated digital strategy that guides which funding offers to accept and how to coordinate them intelligently. It means institutional investment in Ukrainian public administration itself, training highly skilled officials who can negotiate with donors as equals, who can intelligently adapt foreign models, and consistently defend long-term national interests against the short-term pressures of grant cycles.
And the final risk, risk 4. Reform fatigue and institutional overload is one that plagues every nation undergoing massive structural change.
This is a risk tied to the limits of human endurance and political capital. After years of war and economic hardship, political will can fade, established vested interests adapt to new rules, and citizens inevitably lose patience if the benefits of complex structural changes aren't visible immediately. If the process is too slow, cynicism can take root and derail the whole effort.
So the mitigation strategy is about pacing, communication, and managing expectations effectively.
It demands an intelligent sequencing of reforms. This means prioritizing projects that deliver early, tangible, and visible improvements, like much better, faster digital public services, or visible, high-profile anti-corruption wins achieved through technology. These early successes are necessary to sustain public support for the deeper, more painful structural changes that take much longer. It also involves distributing the institutional burden by actively involving civil society and the private sector, sharing the ownership and effort of the reform process.
None of these sophisticated domestic strategies for resilience and governance are possible without massive external financial backing. This integration is just inextricably rooted in Ukraine's political choice to align with Europe.
That alignment provides the framework for the financing. The centerpiece of this financial partnership is the EU's Ukraine facility, which is a flagship commitment demonstrating the scale of European support.
Let's talk about the scale. Can you detail that for us?
The Ukraine facility provides up to 50 billion euros in grants and loans between 2024 and 2027. This financing is explicitly earmarked to support recovery, reconstruction, and modernization, with a clear focus on building a green, digital, and inclusive economy. And it's important to note this isn't discretionary spending. The disbursement is tied to specific performance indicators on governance and reform.
And within that larger structure, there's a dedicated investment component designed to mobilize private capital, not just government aid.
That's the leverage mechanism. The Ukraine investment framework allocates around 9.5 billion euros in reinforced financial instruments guarantees, equity investments, and technical assistance. These instruments are strategically designed to mobilize a much larger pool of money, aiming for over 40 billion euros in public and private investments. This is where much of the concrete funding for digital infrastructure, microgrids, and private IT expansion will likely originate.
And the multilateral development banks are playing an enormous role here, acting as the on-the-ground financiers, particularly the EBRD.
Yes, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development has dramatically scaled up its engagement. They invested a record 2.4 billion euros in Ukraine in 2024 alone, and more than 6 billion since the start of the full-scale invasion. And their focus is critical. It's on energy security financing, those decentralized power systems we discussed, and vital infrastructure, especially modern telecommunications. We also see the EBRD partnering closely with institutions like the IFC and the EU on large-scale projects aimed at expanding and modernizing telecom infrastructure, ensuring that high-speed fiber reaches those disadvantaged, war-affected regions.
This external funding isn't just passive money, though. It comes with structural requirements that act as a powerful lever for internal change and improved governance.
That is the critical function of regulatory alignment as a tool. Foreign funding, especially through the Ukraine facility, is often evaluated against strict EU benchmarks for governance and rule of law. This uses the financial support as a powerful mechanism for cleaning up institutions, increasing transparency, and embedding European legal standards into the digital environment. For instance, funding might be conditioned on the successful implementation of new GDPR-compliant data protection laws or the establishment of that independent oversight body for DIA.
Let's tie this back one more time to the necessary convergence with EU standards, the acquis. Beyond GDPR and NIS2, what concrete technical and legal steps signal integration for citizens?
Well, the convergence requires establishing clear, enforceable rules covering consumer protection in digital services and competition in online markets, essentially adopting the DMA and DSA frameworks. Furthermore, there are specific practical steps signaling integration at the citizen level. They are working on harmonizing roaming regulations to align with the EU's Roam Like at Home policy, which directly benefits citizens and businesses.
And the sources highlight a concrete example of this alignment being planned for the near future.
Yes, the plan includes the rollout of EU-compliant digital wallets for Ukrainians by 2026. This is based on the European Digital Identity Framework, which will allow Ukrainian citizens to use their digital credentials for secure transactions and access to services across the European Union. This shows the alignment is being planned down to the practical, cross-border functionality expected of a future member state.
So what does this all mean? The Digital Reconstruction Plan is a massive, highly detailed response to an unprecedented national crisis, and it seems to be guided by three cross-cutting goals that must shape every single decision to ensure the whole endeavor is socially, economically, and politically sustainable.
These three goals represent the non-negotiable virtues the future system must possess. First, resilience. Systems must be structurally designed to keep working on. Second, inclusion. This directly addresses the regional and social inequalities, ensuring that the benefits of high-value digital careers and high-speed connectivity reach the entire population. And third, trust. This means building the legal and technical safeguards like privacy by design and independent oversight bodies that prevent data abuse, fight corruption, and assure foreign partners of adherence to the rule of law.
That structure is incredibly complex. It requires domestic policy brilliance, massive foreign financing, and technical ingenuity to all work in concert to sustain the nation through reconstruction.
Indeed. The choice for Ukraine is not if it rebuilds, but how. By using IT as the core architecture, it seeks to build systems that anticipate instability and enforce accountability in the management of massive reconstruction funds. You can view this structure as being like designing a modern suspension bridge. Domestic policy provides the distributed, strong piers, the resilient infrastructure and inclusive governance, while international partnerships provide the reinforcing cables, the financing, expertise, and regulatory alignment. It's what enables the entire structure to withstand internal and external stress while connecting all parts of the economy to a shared future.
The effective and rapid deployment of these digital solutions in a wartime environment really sets a standard. It changes the global perception of effective governance and state efficiency, demonstrating that technology can be a vital, enduring ally when physical institutions are under attack or fail entirely. What does digital resilience, this concept of engineering systems to anticipate the worst, mean for how you view the safety and durability of your own nation's critical infrastructure? Given that we are all now operating in an increasingly interconnected and unstable world, the answers to that question will determine the prudence and durability of our own future planning.